Hey everybody, Mr. Grove here. Today we're going to talk about photosynthesis. And so photosynthesis is extremely important to life as that's where our sugars and oxygen come from. And so let's look at the equation for that. And if you notice, it's going to be very familiar to what we saw with cellular respiration. It's just the arrows are pointing the opposite way. So whereas cellular respiration took oxygen and sugars to make energy, water, and carbon dioxide, now photosynthesis is going to take carbon dioxide, water, and energy in the form of sunlight to make sugars and oxygen. So that is our equation as to what's going on. Let's talk about the actual process of photosynthesis. And so bacteria can do photosynthesis, algae can do photosynthesis, but usually what we think of is plants. And so the plants, the part of the plant that does the photosynthesis is going to be the leafy part. So let's take a look at the cross section of a leaf here. And so this cross section, this is going to be the mesophyll tissue, okay? And then on the surface is going to be where this little thing called the stoma or stomata are located. And so this is where I kind of call these the lips because they actually kind of look like lips underneath the microscope. And this is where the carbon dioxide will go in and then the oxygen will come out, just like it does with your lips when you're breathing. The mesophyll tissue, this is where the cells are, and in each cell there are lots of chloroplasts. And so chloroplast is going to be the organelle that we learned that does the photosynthesis. And so the chloroplast has two major parts to it. Kind of a thick syrupy fluid called the stroma, and then these kind of green checker-like discs called the thylakoids. And these discs, when we stack them on top of each other, the stack of thylakoids is going to be called granum, or grana for plural. And so this is kind of the anatomy of the chloroplast, where photosynthesis is going to take place. Inside the thylakoid, this is where the chlorophyll pigment and all the other pigments would be contained. And so that's going to be integral in photosynthesis itself. So let's take a look at the pigments. And so we know that when we have visible light, the pigments of the rainbow are going to be Roy G. Biv, so red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. So these are the colors of the rainbow. This is visible light. If we mix all of these together, we get white. So if you look at a light bulb that's a white light bulb, you're seeing all of these together. And so if we take all of those away, then we get black or nothing. So when you look at somebody with a red shirt on, that white light, so all of these colors is bouncing on to that red shirt, and then all of the things being absorbed would be like the Oy-G Biv part. So orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, and then what's bouncing off of the shirt into your eye is going to be the red. So when we see a red shirt, it looks red to us because that's what's being bounced off or reflected into our eye. It's actually, in some ways, every color but red because all the other colors are being absorbed. So when we talk about plant pigments, the most common one is what's called chlorophyll. And so chlorophyll absorbs, there's a couple of different kinds of chlorophyll, but they kind of work together to absorb the reds through the yellows and the blues through the violets. But what they don't absorb is the green. So the green gets reflected off, and that's why when we look at a plant leaf, it usually looks green. But certain times of the year, in the fall, different types of plants will start to take on different colors, and that's because they have other pigments in them. Those pigments oftentimes are there all year, but they just aren't very loud, so to speak. So the chlorophyll kind of covers them up. It's kind of like if you are singing in a choir and you're a really bad singer, but nobody can tell you're a really bad singer because all the other good singers are singing really loudly. But at the end of the song, if you miss the cutoff, everybody stops and you just keep belting it out, everybody can tell. So in the fall, chlorophyll is like all the other loud singers. You don't notice that in spring and summer, but in the fall, chlorophyll stops and then all these other bad singers kind of start to become noticeable for just a little bit of time until they stop also. And so let's talk about what some of these are. So there's the carotenoids, and this is what's going to give kind of your yellow, oranges, and red colors. Okay, and so they will absorb the green through the violet and then reflect these red, orange, yellow colors. Oak trees will have a lot of tannins, and so they absorb most of the colors, and what they reflect then is these brownish colors, and that's why oak trees a lot of times in the fall will just kind of have that kind of dingy brown color. Anthocyanins are real pretty in the fall. This is what gives our red colors, so a lot of red maples and other kind of red fall trees, and they're absorbing kind of the yellow through the violets. And so these are the different plant pigments that can be produced in that way. So let's take a look at photosynthesis as a process. The nice thing about photosynthesis is it only has 2 stages, unlike cellular respiration that kind of had 4. So that'll make it a little easier for us. And those stages are the light reaction and the Calvin cycle. And they both take place in the chloroplast. It's just that they take place in different parts. So the light reaction is going to be in the thylakoids, so those green checkered disc-like things. And then the Calvin cycle is going to be in the stroma, and that's the thick syrupy part of the chloroplast. And so what goes in to our light reaction is going to be light, obviously, and then water, and then what is produced is a byproduct of oxygen, and then the product NADPH and ATP. Those 2 things will go over to the Calvin cycle, and they will, in turn, with carbon dioxide, produce sugars, but that uses up the ATP and NADPH, so the empty versions, NADP plus and ADP, will go back to the light reaction to pick up more electrons and to make more ATP. And so it's kind of a cycle, and all we have to keep putting in is water, light, and carbon dioxide, and we'll keep getting out oxygen and sugar. And so that's where the equation comes from. So let's take a look specifically at the light reaction. Like we said, it's done in the thylakoids, and it's going to look very similar to the electron transport chain. And so light shines, and it hits our pigments, molecules like chlorophyll, and it bumps electrons off. And so those little electrons get bumped and kind of pushed through the series of proteins by light, kind of driving that. And that will help make our ATP and our NADPH. So those electrons, as they kind of jump, they will push hydrogens across the membrane. And so as those hydrogens get pushed across the membrane, we have a hydrogen ion concentration. This first electron, well, we lost it because it got knocked off by the light. So it has to be replaced, and it's replaced by the electron from water. So when we intake water, we take that electron, and it replaces the one that was on the chlorophyll. So now we have hydrogen ions left to float around, and then we also have oxygen. So oxygen is one of our products then that we're producing. So as the electron's jumping along, we're putting all these hydrogens down here. Eventually that electron has to go somewhere, so it goes to the taxicab, NADPH. P for plant is kind of how you can remember that. And then now we have all these hydrogen ions on this side and not very many on this side. So they want to get through to the other side. So they're going to go through this special molecule, ATP synthase, and that protein will be what makes our ATP. And so that is the light reaction. So water's going in, light's going in, and then we had to have our empty versions of NADP plus and ADP. And then what comes out is oxygen, ATP, and NADPH. And so that's done in the thylakoids. So once we've made those, now we can go to the Calvin cycle. And so the Calvin cycle is where we're going to make our sugar. And so this cycle, this is in the stroma of the chloroplast, And it's kind of like the Krebs cycle. So we've already got molecules involved. And so this first one is a 5-carbon molecule called rubisco. And we have 3 of those. And so we're going to add to each one of those another carbon in the form of carbon dioxide. So our 3 carbon dioxides will come in, add to each one of those, and that will make a 6-carbon molecule. Well, we have to spend some energy, so that energy in the form of ATP that we had to add to our Calvin cycle is going to take this 6-carbon molecule, and we're going to add some electrons as well, and we're going to form another 6-carbon molecule called G3P. And so that G3P, we have 6 of them now. One of those will come out of the cycle. The other 5 will stay in and continue around. And then we spend a little bit more ATP, and we take these 5 G3P molecules, so 15 total carbons, rearrange them to 3 5-carbon rubisco molecules, so 15 total carbons, and we're back where we started. So we had to spend 9 ATP, 6 NADPHs, and then we had to put in 3 carbon dioxides, and what came out was this G3P, which is kind of our base foundation to make sugars, glucose and other types of sugars. And then the rest just cycles back around. So that is the Calvin cycle. It's sometimes called the dark reaction. In fact, your book kind of calls it that. But that's a little bit silly because it doesn't usually take place in the dark. In fact, rarely does it. It takes place in the light, just like the light reaction would. But that is photosynthesis. And as we can see on our review here, light, water, carbon dioxide are coming in. Oxygen and sugars then are the products that are coming out. But that's when everything is working right. Sometimes for plants, we have conditions that make it a little hard to do photosynthesis. And so when it's working right, we have what's called C3 plants. Because that first, let's go back here, that first molecule that we make is a 3-carbon molecule. So most plants are C3 plants. An oak tree, a rose bush, dandelion, those would all be C3 plants. And so when things are running normal, we light reaction in the day, we Calvin cycle in the day, and then remember the stomata is what brings in the carbon dioxide and gives off the oxygen. And that can happen in the day because that's when we're doing the Calvin cycle to need that carbon dioxide. But if it's really hot, when you open the stomata, you're going to lose moisture. And if you're a plant, that's the one thing that you cannot afford to lose. And so in really hot situations, tropical environments, then plants will have to use an alternative strategy. And so some of these are called C4 plants. And so what they'll do is they'll open their stomata in the mornings and evenings when it's cooler, bring in the CO2, but instead of going straight to the Calvin cycle, they kind of store that as a 4-carbon compound. Then, when they're ready to do the Calvin cycle in the daytime, they can use that 4-carbon molecule and change that into the stuff that they need, the carbon source that they need for the Calvin cycle to make their G3P. The problem is we've added an extra step, and anytime you add an extra step, the cost is a little steeper. It's like when you have a middleman in your buying, you're going to pay a little bit more for your price. So these plants need to have a little bit more energy, and so that's why they live in tropical kind of regions where energy is not really a problem. There's lots of sunshine. So types of C4 plants would be corn, sorghum, which is milo, sugarcane. These are all kind of tropical kind of plants that have developed the strategy to not lose water, but it does cost them a little extra energy, and so living in the sunny environments is a big plus for them. If we take it to the even more extreme of desert type plants, very, very, very hot environments, sometimes we have to open the stomata at nighttime. And so that will make a compound called malic acid, and then we'll store that compound, malic acid, until the next day. And then when the plant is doing Calvin cycle in the day, along with the light reaction, it can convert that malic acid into the carbon source it needs for the Calvin cycle to make its G3P sugar. So again, we're adding an extra step. So that means we have to have extra energy. In the desert, sunshine is no problem. And so these plants can save water and still get their photosynthesis done by being CAM plants. So some examples of that would be like cactus, jade is a type of cactus, pineapples are CAM plants, any kind of really deserty type of plants would be those. So this is photosynthesis, kind of how it's done normally, and then how some plants have kind of developed strategies to survive in harsh conditions. And so I hope that was helpful.